Let's start with the question of where growth will come on the other side of whatever it is we're going through, because that's ultimately going to be the question here. I understand from economists like you, it comes from one of two sources, either more workers or more productivity. Are we going to get more workers?
We're looking at both fewer workers and lower productivity, as you know. So let me focus on the fewer workers aspect for a moment. The real issue, demographic issue facing the U.S. is we have a plummeting birth rate. And so total fertility in the U.S. is now below the level required to keep population growth constant. And so the issue here is that on average now, a woman in the U.S. is expected to have 1.65 children over her lifetime. So women used to have 3 kids, then it fell to 2. Women were having comfortably above 2 kids for many decades. With a fertility rate below 2, that means our population is going to age and it's not going to grow. And so eventually we're going to have a shrinking working age population.
Unless, Melissa, we have immigration.
That's right.
And that's why immigration, I think many of us at this conference feel is so very, very important. What's your sense of what economists would say, the politics apart, about the immigration policy?
Economists love immigration. We think immigration is a potential answer to our demographic challenges as well as our productivity innovation challenges. Since immigrants come in, they work, they're more likely than native-born Americans to be entrepreneurs and innovators. Of course, as you know, Larry, immigration rates are way down. So we used to bring in, as you know, 2016, we had as many as 1 million new people coming into the country every year. That number is now below 250,000. And so the combination of a declining native-born population and a decline in immigration portends even worse demographic challenges than if we were just facing one versus the other.
Let me see if I can do a little arithmetic based on what you said. From 1 million to 250,000.
Yeah.
So that's about 750,000 people a year. So that's about 0.5% of our workforce, maybe a little less. So 0.5% slower labor force growth over time can accumulate to something that is very large.
And if we go back to the birth rates, we have about 500,000 fewer babies being born a year than in the not distant past.
Melissa, if you, what would you say about this? Most people are scared that immigrants come and they take jobs for Americans, and that if there are more immigrants, then there aren't going to be as many jobs for Americans, or if there are jobs, because there's more competition, they're going to be paid less. And that's true whether the job people think is working at McDonald's or is working doing computer programming at Microsoft. How should people feel? Shouldn't they have this worry that they're going to be poorer if we take all the immigrants, just like they get hurt if we take a lot of trade from other countries where they have much lower wages?
So the reason economists are so bullish on immigration is because we have so much evidence that immigrants are good for the economy. They are good for most workers. But it is true that there are some groups in some places that will feel wage pressures. And I think the way we solve this issue is to make sure that we recognize the disparate impacts of certain groups. We recognize that low-wage workers in certain sectors might not experience the benefits, the overall benefits that immigrants bring to the economy, and we take steps to help them. I mean, it's not dissimilar to what we have to do with trade, too. You know, more imports is good for most people, but some people are harmed by it. We're going to see this, too, with the shift to a greener economy. Some people are going to lose their jobs, even though it's better for everyone. And so, I mean, I think acknowledging that some people feel and are harmed by this, but that's a small, concentrated group, and taking steps to address that allows us to do things that make the economy grow and be more productive.
Sorry, Melissa, I wanted to come back to fertility. Larry's pointed out a way in which economics, whether misperceived or not, may affect our willingness to have immigration. What about fertility? Are there economic causes for the reduction in fertility?
So the decline in U.S. fertility, and it's really being driven by a plummeting of birth rates since 2007. Births fell after the Great Recession. They haven't recovered. You can't point to any policy or economic factor that's changed since 2007. So sometimes people will say things like childcare has become more expensive, and if we just made childcare less expensive, people would return to having more than 2 kids. That is just not the case, right? There's nothing that easy that we could point to. And in fact, U.S. women now are just having births in the same way that women in other high-income countries have reduced their birth rates long before, in the 80s and 90s. So I don't think this is going to be easy to turn around. Lots of other countries have taken direct steps to try and incentivize people to have more kids. There's a lot of countries that have experimented with baby bonuses, a few $1,000s. Birth rates go up a little bit in the following year, but nothing like the 20% increase in fertility we would need to get back to replacement level.
Melissa, having an expert like you here, I can't resist stepping out of our mutual lane as economists to ask a question I suspect is on many people's minds. Do you think that the recent Supreme Court decision and the steps that are going to be taken in a number of states, do you think that's going to materially affect the number of births in the United States?
We do have estimates on this based on lots of data we have about how abortion restrictions lead to more birth rates. I expect there will be about 100,000 more births a year. Yes, this is not going to bring fertility rates back to where they were. This is going to mean that some women who wouldn't want to have a child now are going to. Since you raised the issue, I will say that this makes the imperative of doing more to support kids and low-income women in this country that much stronger, which is, that was something that Congress was talking about for a brief moment in the initial Build Back Better. That stuff got jettisoned. In the post-Dobbs decision paradigm, we are going to have some more births disproportionately born to low-income women, and we need to talk about how we're going to make sure that those children are well taken care of.
So, Larry, can we make up the loss of population and workers with productivity? We have the CHIPS and Science Act now. We have the Inflation Reduction Act, both of which I understand are meant to increase productivity. Can we make it up in increased productivity?
Melissa organized a terrific session here on R&D and science leadership issues. I think there's a lot we can do, but it's both about spending money and it's about spending it well. There was the famous discovery of DNA by Crick and Watson. Today, people can't usually get their first grant until they're over 40. And so I think we need to change the systems as well as putting more resources in if we want to maximize science, innovation, and their capacity for productivity. I think we've also got to have to think about a lot of things post-COVID.
David, there's one other factor here. So we've talked about fewer working age people, less productivity per worker. We also have fewer working age people working. So the decline in labor force participation among people between the ages of 25 to 54 is yet another challenge that we're going to have to deal with in this country that's negatively going to impact growth going forward.
It used to be that 95% of working age men were working. Today, it's 85% are working. That is an extra 10% of people who aren't having the satisfaction of work, aren't contributing to the economy, are much less well-placed to raise healthy, successful families, are often angered and alienated from our society. And so we tend to think of, on shows like this, the path of fortunate college-educated workers. We have got to be thinking about that large group of men much more than women, who are really struggling in our country right now, and what can be done from childhood on to maximize their opportunities.